Hi, I'm Dr. Shiloh.
And I'm Dr. Scott.
And this is LA Not So Confidential, the forensic psychology and true crime podcast.
Each episode, we explore the intersection of psychology, the criminal justice system, and entertainment.
Today, our episode is on the forensic psych topic of the psychology of hate.
Welcome back, everybody. This is our monthly episode. That's our traditional format. We're so glad you're coming back and sticking with us. We are kind of blown away about the response we got from our last episode. It's probably, as Dr. Shiloh was just telling me before we switched the record button on, is how much conversation episode 204 sort of instigated. And that was entitled, it was our last forensic psych episode, and it was entitled, What Happens When Bad Things Happen to the Rich? And so we explored why we, the collective we, not just me,
the non-rich,
why we sometimes delight in the tragedy in the lives of the uber wealthy. Now, as I was saying earlier, when I become an ultra wealthy billionaire, I will be a benevolent billionaire. I will not be like one of the ones everybody hates. I'll make sure that, I stay likable. I will do my best.
You guys heard it here. We got to hold him to it.
You can all hold me accountable.
He won't care when he is a billionaire what you peons have to say.
Oh my gosh. If I was a billionaire, I'd be Batman. I love that meme that goes around. It's like people with these enormous amounts of money and they could change the world and they just keep going for profit. But
yes,
go back and listen to episode 204 if you're interested in diving into that.
Yeah, that was a good one. We refer to it as our Eat the Rich episode, but I feel like today's episode is a really good companion piece to that in many ways.
Yeah.
So that was our last forensic psych episode, as you said. Our last episode was 205, and that was our Behind the Couch live stream. It was just you and I yapping about true crime in the news. We covered new developments in the Maura Murray case, some updates about the offenders in the Slender Man case, and we covered the Zizian cult. So please note, because we got a couple people writing it, our lives that we release on the main feed now are recorded a month before. So like with this one, other new info came out about some of the other like peripheral stuff we just touched on. So I know it sounds like we were kind of talking about something where, now there's new information out. That kind of happens because there's a month in between
release. Yeah.
And especially when we're talking about like stuff in the news, if you will. So just something to keep in mind as we try to get more content out on the regular feed, but generally not a huge issue. But what is a huge issue is that I have a cold today. So forgive me, you guys, if I sound nasally or whatever the heck sounds come out of this microphone for me today. We will try our best in editing. I'm sure Jason will catch it all, but yeah, spring. I already had the flu in February and now spring gave me a cold. So here we are.
Yikes.
Stay healthy. Yeah, good thing we record separately.
This will be one of those episodes where your voice gives out. So you have to record separately from our prepared script. And then it just sounds really fake.
Right.
Like really robotic.
It's all Shiloh AI at this point.
Oh, right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, and that's so weird that you say that too. Like every aspect of technology that we use to do this podcast suddenly now offers these weird things like, oh, Zoom is going to include, you can make 3 minutes of an AI avatar of yourself every month. Like, I don't want to do that. They look creepy as hell.
It's too much. Like, it's too much.
Yeah. It's too much. Stop it.
Stop. All right. So before my voice gives out, should we jump in?
Yeah.
Okay. So recently I was commuting home and, I take the same freeway that everyone trekking to Coachella takes, right?
Right.
So there was a big electronic billboard and I saw an ad that said, quote, "You're not rolling. Anti-Semitism is up 200%. And it was by jewbelong.org. And if I have to explain it, like rolling meaning to like be high on some common rave drugs, ecstasy, that sort of thing. So I thought that was kind of clever and cute if they were anticipating people were going to Coachella and already under the influence while they're driving, which I hope they were not. But jewbelong.org has a lot of these really like catchy campaigns to call out anti-Semitism around the country, major cities mostly. And they really seem to have a voice where they're speaking to the younger generation about living a joyful Jewish life while also educating the wider public on related matters like this billboard had. So back to that stat though, because, I saw that and I thought, well, that's jarring. So it was anti-Semitism is up 200%. It was stark, yet not surprising in this day and age, right?
No, not at all. Just as a quick anecdote, one of my dearest friends that I grew up with is from a family that sort of were my theater parents. Like when I started discovering performing in middle school, I connected with this wonderful family in my hometown with three amazing daughters, all brilliantly talented and great parents. And they were just the most wonderful, understanding, and supportive of pursuing theater, which my mom and dad were supportive of. They just didn't really get it.
Yeah.
So this was a great experience. And over the years, and I was so, as a typical person being integrated into the society that you grow up in, you don't really get, I didn't really get as a young person, as a child and as a young adult, I really did not get it. I did not get the constant oppression of people of color. I did not get the anti-Semitism that, sort of roils underneath my hometown, even though there were several temples and, there was a really kind of strong Jewish community. And I've always been connected with Lisa. She's a dear, dear friend who was the middle sister of that family. And she was recounting to me that when her parents had moved from their sort of long-term home, they had downsized into a different suburban area outside Huntsville. And it was it was a community built in probably the early 90s, but really good construction. So new build, but good construction. And it was one of those places that had an HOA. And Judy, Lisa's mom, had put a flag not related to anything, sort of like a spring flag and and a frog statue, a little frog garden statue in the front yard. And Lisa showed me the letter they got. And the letter was first it starts off as these things are not allowed. This is, I'm going to report you to the HOA. You can't have any of this. And it becomes more and more unhinged. First, it's just you're breaking the rule. Then it's ugly. It looks tacky. And then it goes into using slur after slur, anti-Semitic slur. And I'm not even going to use them here because they were so foul. And it was typed. And then in the end, it wasn't even signed. It just said, this is a warning.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And this is like 7 years ago. So this stuff continues in all communities. We living in a large metropolitan area get to decide that we turn our head to focus on something else. Maybe we do it unconsciously to look away from what we don't want to see.
Sure.
But it's something that's just constantly going on. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today, is how that 200% rise is recent and it is escalating, and it's being used as a tool to promote other means. A lot of what we're talking about today is part of human nature. It's a nasty part of human nature, but it's also being used as a tool to divide people.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, let's go back to that stat. Anti-Semitism is up 200%. It's a stark, but unfortunately not surprising number. However, it was much worse than that after the attack in Israel in October of 2023, in which Hamas-led militant groups launched a surprise attack on Israel, where over 1,100 Israelis and foreign nationals were killed and 251 were taken hostage. And according to the Anti-Defamation League, in the 3 months after the October 7th massacre, anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. skyrocketed, reaching a total of 3,291 incidents between October 7th and January 7th. And this was actually a 361% increase compared to the same time period in 2022. So we can break the data down like this: 56 incidents of physical assault, 554 incidents of vandalism, 1,347 incidents of verbal or written harassment, and 1,307 rallies, including anti-Semitic rhetoric, expressions of support for terrorism against the state of Israel, or anti-Zionism. Part of it is this thought that has been promoted on really mainstream media. If you look at the more right wing of the media, which is now mainstream, whether they call it that or not, this "Jews will not replace us" chant is being used at these protests. And it's just, it's throwing gasoline on a fire.
It is. It's interesting. You look at those two stats because you have about 1,300 of the verbal or written harassment, which is exactly what you're talking about with your friend's family, but also about 1,300 rallies. Like, think how much verbal or written harassment doesn't take much energy to do, but a rally certainly does. I mean, to say that those are comparable accounts as the stats have just risen over the last year and a half here. But so here we are, right? Mid 2025. I think we're leading off here basically saying hate remains just as relevant today as it has throughout history, but manifesting in new forms while echoing old prejudices, whether through racism, xenophobia, religious intolerance, or political polarization. Hatred continues to divide communities and really fuel that conflict here and around the world. Social media and digital platforms have also amplified the reach of hate, allowing harmful ideologies to spread rapidly, kind of like what we see in the conspiracy theory world. And we will touch on this a little bit more later in today's episode. But despite progress in civil rights and social awareness, the persistence of hate reminds us that it's not a relic of the past, and it's a challenge that must still be actively confronted. So with that, just, I'm sure you can understand the tone today. Trigger warnings are going to include hate crimes, physical attacks, including murder, genocide, and the like. So please listen with care. We also understand that there's a lot of feelings about this right now, and we encourage your engagement with us however you want. I guess keep it non-hateful if you're going to choose to do that.
Right. Let's have a conversation, which is going to be integral to the points that we wrap up with in today's episode. So the American Psychological Association goes on to define hate as a hostile emotion, combining intense feelings of detestation, anger, and often a desire to do harm. Now, not only is that negative just on its own, but hate is often deep-rooted, which can make it very difficult to reverse or to heal. Hate has been further explained as emerging from personal perceptions of powerlessness or perhaps personal experience in which someone feels injured or mistreated by others. Keyword, in which someone feels injured or feels mistreated by others. And this tracks with some of the phenomenon we have covered with those who act out in violence because of a grievance, right? I mean, this is what we do in threat assessment, in risk assessment, is we look at, is there a grievance? What is underneath that grievance? Is that grievance active? Is there a plan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Hatred can even be rooted in a perceived threat to our survival as individuals or to a group or a subculture, which is going to naturally trigger a strong emotional response. Now, in a review of research on hate that was published in 2018, the authors explore how anger and revenge come from wanting to change a behavior or situation, or to fix or to repay a wrong. But the thing is, the hater believes the person or the thing on the receiving end cannot be changed, which fuels them to want to eliminate or destroy it or them.
I find that so interesting. Like, there's this hate. I need you to change for whatever reason, but I don't think you will. So therefore, you have to be done away with. Like, what? Talk about mental gymnastics.
It's mental gymnastics, but there is a method to the madness, because that is how propaganda is used as a divisive tool. And we're going to get into like the one word that is going to be the thematic about how it was done in the past, how it continues to be done, and then the rhetoric that supports these individuals or these organizations cannot change. There's no hope for it. Therefore, hopelessness is used as a part of the person that thinks that they might be able to change or might be able to have a conversation. Don't even bother having a conversation.
Yeah.
Don't just flame back as strong as you can on the internet with something quippy or something mean or something cruel, because that'll show them, right? That is mental gymnastics right there, thinking that you have that sort of power. Yeah.
We know throughout psychology that hopelessness is such a powerful feeling and cognitive process too, right? Like, if you think the situation is hopeless, and then where, some of the thinking patterns go from there. So yeah, definitely a factor here. There's also this concept of self-hate that occurs when we become intensely critical of ourselves. then what happens is the narratives we tell ourselves end up being saturated with more negativity and contempt. This can occur when you fail to maybe meet the expectations that you have set for yourself, or also when you feel like you have let others down if they're setting the expectations on you.
So doesn't that sound a little bit like our moral injury
Yeah.
episode?
Oh, sure. Oh, I forgot
Yeah.
about that. Yeah. Yeah. And self-hatred is also when someone has a deep dislike or even a real hatred towards themselves for factors or attributes or just parts of them, right?
Right.
So people who struggle with this often have a hard time handling their emotions in a healthy way. And instead of dealing with their insecurities or unhappiness directly, they usually end up pushing those negative feelings onto other people. This, in a sense, is a way of coping, not healthy coping, but helping them avoid the painful and uncomfortable feelings brewing inside. But why does this happen? And what does that actually look like day to day? The behavior that follows with that is what we call projection. So projection is a psychological defense mechanism where people throw their own thoughts, feelings, or issues onto someone else. Basically, if someone's feeling something they don't know how to face, they project it outward. For example, someone who feels insecure about their intelligence might consistently accuse others of being stupid or ignorant, or even though deep down, it's really their own fear talking. So this is just a little piece that I wanted to mention that could also be going on here for someone, maybe before an ideology sets hold that they then glob onto that will lead them towards the path of hate.
Yeah, I encourage anyone who's interested in this topic, even if this is the first episode of ours that you've ever listened to, get online, do a quick internet search for classic defense mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's fascinating, even if you're not interested in psychology, but it is just reading the list of defense mechanisms can actually turn on light bulbs in yourself. One of the things that we know about long-term hate speech and homophobia, which is homophobia, fear of anger. We have problems with that terms now because we want to expand on it. But over and over again, research has shown that some of the most vociferous anti-LGBTQIA individuals, the ones who spout the most hate, even if it's condescending or minimizing, degrading, it's because they are likely on the Kinsey spectrum with same-sex attractions. And
as
they
we
project
all almost are.
Exactly.
It's
like
a spectrum.
Vast majority of people are. Fascinating, though.
Yeah. When I was I think it was one of my internships, we had not a guest supervisor, but we had someone like a psychologist come in and do a little lecture for us. And he had a book where he photocopied, which you're probably not supposed to do, 100 different defense mechanisms and gave us all copies of it just to it was a really cool, here I was doing sex offender treatment, but it was just one of those Psych 101 things that is cool to review and look at and be like, oh, of course, I see this all day, every day.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So
fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Look it up, guys.
So when used in hate crime law, the word hate does not mean rage, anger, or even general dislike. In the legal context, hate means bias against people or groups with specific characteristics that are defined by the law. So the FBI defines a hate crime as a criminal offense against a person or property motivated in whole or in part by the offender's bias against race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity, which is also something that has really come to blow my mind, along with many other things, is the unbelievable bias against disability that continues to grow. Like, what the hell? That is insane. We could do an entire episode just on that, and maybe we will. But before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the federal government took the position that the protection of civil rights was merely a local function. Where have we heard that before? Leave it to the states. Yeah, because that goes so well when you leave everything to the states, right? However, the murders of 3 civil rights workers, Michael Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, and James Chaney, near Philadelphia, Mississippi, in what was known as the Mississippi Burning case, a very famous movie, very famous case. And that became the largest federal investigation in the state at the time and was the start of the FBI's civil rights program. On October 20th, 1967, 7 men were convicted of conspiring to violate the constitutional rights of the slain civil rights workers.
Yeah, but it's not just the FBI. Obviously, hate crimes don't just happen in federal cases. So their involvement, of course, is still somewhat limited. And we have hate crime enhancements that occur at the local and state level, of course, depending on the crime, depending on the jurisdiction. So local agencies can prosecute hate crimes, is what I'm saying, as well as obviously the FBI. But the FBI does keep track of nationwide stats with the Uniform Crime Report, and the numbers for 2023 were released in the fall of last year, 2024. There were over 11,000 incidents of hate crimes, and the breakdown for motivations were about 52% race or ethnicity, about 22% religion, about 18% sexual orientation, about 4% was gender identity, 1.6% was disability, and then 0.9% for gender. So that's just reported hate crimes. And we know that the research consistently shows that these crimes are widely underreported. I think couple that with problems in the reporting system to the UCR, we can imagine that those numbers are actually much, much higher. But I just think it's interesting to look at the breakdown. And although it's 0.9%, at least we can still prosecute crimes for being hate crimes, even if they're simply against a man or a woman, just looking at gender.
Well, we can for now.
Yeah, well,
unless
this time capsule of an episode.
Yeah, exactly, time capsule of an episode, because it seems like some people are trying to use The Handmaid's Tale not as a warning, but as a playbook for what they want to do. The way that true hate forms is really actually a complex issue, because it rarely stems from one single experience. And of course, there's all sorts of other things like neurological makeup, brain structure. It's a combination of nature and nurture. But again, like small t trauma, it's not just one single experience. So we're going to boil it down into some digestible factors. The research agrees that there are 3 main components or phases that lead to the hate or the dehumanization of others. Ding, ding, ding. If we were doing Pee-wee's Playhouse, that's the word of the day, is dehumanization. Yep. So the first is really quite simple. And like in a lot of phenomenon, it can be just circumstance, or it can be in the environment you were born in that cultivates this path. And that is simply the lack of interaction with those that are seen as quote unquote other.
Yes. So we need to acknowledge the data that we actually covered in our last forensic episode, what happens when bad things happen to the rich, which is the natural human instinct of othering, which is a concept rooted in psychology and evolution. We talked about that a lot. But just as a recap, we naturally form an us versus them mentality, right, as human beings, especially in environments that are tied closely to our identity. I think in the other episode, we talked about your work, like your profession is a part of your identity. And a lot of times that can lead to these us versus them in groups and out groups. So in groups are formed around shared traits like cultures or interests. They offer safety, they offer belonging and understanding. Evolutionarily, humans relied on groups for survival, which encourage trust and cooperation within your group. And the opposite for people who are not like you, the outgroups. So according to social identity theory, we gain self-esteem from our group affiliations, which can lead to favoritism and bias against outsiders. This in-group bias is also reinforced by cognitive ease, as familiar settings reduce anxiety and make interactions a little bit more smooth. Ultimately, having an in-group makes us feel good, and each group tends to boost its own self-image while viewing outsiders with suspicion or even contempt. And studies have shown this forever. Even when we randomly assign people to groups in a lab setting, they start thinking that their group is better than the others. So, tale as old as time in psychology, it happens automatically.
So for this component, there's this natural issue of othering happening, but then also the lack of exposure either purposefully or not, right?
Yeah, exactly. So a common example given when talking about this is looking at sports fans. So I'm a diehard Dodgers fan, and their rivals are the San Francisco Giants. So I might start to develop a sense of hating the Giants fans. Maybe I think they're obnoxious or whatever. Perhaps I hear stories of fights between the fans at games, and that just kind of fuels the flames. But actually, I've never been to a Dodgers Giants game, I don't think. I mean, maybe, but I was probably young enough to not even think about it. But so I don't have firsthand experience of this, but I actually have the opportunity later in the year. We have a conference that's going to be up in San Francisco, and we're thinking about getting tickets to, like, mass tickets. So whoever wants to go to a game can go to the game. But what if I go to a game and I find out that they're like really lovely people, everything's fine, and then I have a good interaction with them? So, something that I kind of have in my mind because of all these peripheral things that I hear could definitely be changed because I am now starting to interact with the others, aka the Giants fans.
Yeah, so much of that is a combination of factors. In my algorithm on social media, I will get sort of Karen moments, but one of them to me, was a really disturbing video of a stadium, and I can't remember. I know it was a football game, but they had an away game, and then the opposing team sat in the home team. No, I'm getting it all mixed up. Let me just say this.
There was a ball involved, and
there was a ball involved.
In
there was a stadium, and somebody started filming this couple sitting in, and they're wearing their gear, and they're surrounded by people that are, on supporting the other team.
Yeah.
And all of the people are so supportive, and they're kind of like joking back and forth, except for one guy who progressively gets drunker and drunker. And he just turns into a monster towards, get this, not only the opposing team supporters, but the female of the couple, the woman of the couple. And he's not even acknowledging that a guy twice his size is sitting next to her. He's just saying really disgusting things. And it is that mental gymnastics, also, the disinhibition, because there's clearly alcohol in play here. And there's also disinhibition, thinking that he's getting support. And he's got people around him telling him, shut up. And he just continues.
Yeah. Go back and listen to our sports fandom violence episode.
Yeah.
It covers all of that.
Yeah, it covers all of it. So the second component here is when disgust develops for that particular group. The movie Inside Out does a really, really good job of boiling down sort of the core emotions as we currently understand them in our culture. And there's a scientific basis for why we have this little kaleidoscope of basic emotions and how they drive our behaviors and our understanding of the world around us. I think it was Mindy Kaling that does the voice of disgust. She's wonderful.
She is.
So when someone starts to be so disgusted with a person of another group that they see them now as less human or not deserving of humane treatment, as if there's some sort of human hierarchy, right? And unfortunately, this is historic as well. We have seen it over and over again historically in groups that have used this device to other and marginalize populations. So you need those beliefs to then say to yourself, well, my group reigns supreme over that group. Generally, the disgust verbiage about another group will come from the leader or an authority figure from the in-group. How culty is that, right?
Yeah.
So they will talk about animalistic or gross behavior that those people engage in. And soon it starts giving real-life examples of their disgusting, less than human actions that warrants you to recoil in disgust. And sometimes this is literally verbalized by comparing a group of people to animals, calling them rats, cockroaches, mongrels, vermin, and on and on and on.
Yeah, we've heard it a million times through history. This is actually a pretty simple path when you break it down. The lack of exposure to others, then this feeling of disgust develops, and then the last thing that happens is an ideology takes hold, and that solidifies the hate. So as a recap, because we've talked about ideologies a lot, ideology is a set of opinions or beliefs of a group or of an individual. Very often, ideology refers to a set of political beliefs or a set of ideas that characterize a particular culture. Ideologies act as total systems of beliefs that address both questions of truth for that group, as well as questions of conduct and how they should be behaving. An ideology speaks to the group, the nation, or the class, what have you, and demands commitment, and they are very inflexible. So think about it in terms of other sacred belief ideologies like religion. I mean, try talking someone out of their religion, right? If you just think of that as an example, that is how much of a stronghold there is with other types of ideologies as well. Sacred beliefs can cause people to justify all kinds of horrible behavior, including violence towards others. Not unlike the psychology behind those who are drawn into cults, this ideology may just take hold at just the right time in a person's life when they are looking to filling a void, and that's the dangerous part.
So, psychologist Bernard Golden is the author of a great book called Overcoming Destructive Anger: Strategies That Work. And he talks about that when hate is happening within a group, it seems to cultivate a feeling of belonging and mutual support that fills the emptiness within one's sense of self. So, again, there's a little bit of an equation there. What is happening first is what we used to call in threat assessment or risk assessment is empty vessel. When someone feels or experiences a lack of meaning in their life, it's very easy to fill that with hate rhetoric. And Golden goes on to explain it as if the hatred of others is a way of distracting oneself from self-exploration and developing your own identity, because that can be really distressing for some people. And I get it. I actually get it. I mean, as clinicians, you and I have both worked with people that if your whole identity is being a dad or a mom based on a template that has gone through, 300 years of sort of mutations through your culture, like this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm a dad. This is all I do. Or I'm a farmer, or I'm a cop, or I'm a soldier, or I'm a scientist even. I mean, we've seen it on the far ends of like junk science as well. That can be a huge factor. I want to quote Dr. Golden. Acts of hate are attempts to distract oneself from feelings such as helplessness, powerlessness, injustice, and shame. Hate is grounded in some sense of perceived threat. It is an attitude that can give rise to hostility and aggression towards individuals or groups. Like much of anger, it is a reaction to and a distraction from some form of inner pain. The individual consumed by hate may believe that the only way to regain some sense of power over his or her pain is to preemptively strike out at others. In this context, each moment of hate is a temporary reprieve from inner suffering. And I want to take a moment to really sit with this for a second, because when we take our stance, and let me tell you, I would fully own my part in this as well, is it is very easy to slip into where you just like have these ideas about who someone is, what that group is, without looking at, well, why am I feeling that way?
Yeah.
And I'm a clinician with over 20 years of experience and 2 feeling wheel pillows on my couch in my office.
One under each arm.
Right under each arm, so I could identify feelings. And you would not believe how many people have a very, very limited vocabulary for naming their feelings. So if you can't name your feelings, you're sitting in distress and you don't even know what's the term for it? Is alexithymia, is not being able to understand what your emotional state you're in. So it's fascinating stuff. And it just challenges us all to be responsible about what's going on inside our brains and what's going on inside our hearts.
Well, not even just not being able to name a feeling, but not even questioning, why is this triggering something in me? Right. Yeah. I think that's something you and I can relate to, right? We get triggered about stupid little things too. And sometimes the path of least resistance is to just talk shit, right? So,
well, you're very kind. You don't do this. Like I let my freak flag. No, you very rarely. I let my freak flag fly with you all the time. I'm texting her. Do you have a minute? Do you have a minute? It's just a second. I swear. It's just a second.
Yes. Well, like the other day, you were like, I have the tea. I was like, when I answered the phone, I'm like, oh, thank God I needed this
That's
today.
that's true. I texted you in all caps. I have hot goss.
Oh, that's right. Like immediately call me, please.
Oh
But
my
yeah,
God.
it's instead of looking internally and going, what makes me feel uncomfy here, to just lash out is like, again, another human tale as old as time for sure. But that's what he's saying, right? Like you get that little sense of power of being able to strike out against others.
Right. And this is, I'm not saying it's necessarily better that you're not doing something physical, because allowing yourself too much latitude in that area actually damages yourself. It damages your own neurology, which leads into
Yeah.
my next point, is that a really important part of this discussion really has to include emerging research in neuroscience. And that research strongly indicates that many of our in-group biases and stances have a foundation in our neural hardwiring. In other words, how individuals identify politically has a lot to do with wiring. And we have a ton of research on it now. Individuals who generally, and let me be clear to everyone, I respect all of our listeners, anybody out there in the future, forever, how long beyond my lifetime may be listening to this. Generally speaking, individuals who identify on the further conservative end of the political and ideological spectrum often exhibit heightened neural responses to fear and disgust stimuli as compared to the opposite end of the spectrum or the liberal counterparts. Now, does this directly translate into hate behaviors or speech? No, it does not. But the implications here are for a kindling atmosphere, or rather, an easy to spark individual will respond strongly. Now we have functional MRI studies that have revealed that the more conservative, or let me even go farther, the more rigid thinking that an individual has, again, a tendency, I'm saying a tendency to have a physically larger amygdala. Now, you may want some parts of your body to be bigger. You do not want a larger amygdala. You want everything in your body to work in tandem in the balance that it's supposed to have. And the amygdala is a brain region associated with processing fear and threats. So this suggests a greater sensitivity to perceived dangers. Again, perceived dangers, right? Part of the way our brain is wired is to keep us safe, right? But sometimes it can be overactive and we can misinterpret data in our environment. What we do with that data, that misinterpreted data, can get not so healthy for us and the people around us.
There's people where their amygdalas basically are broken and don't light up and they don't have those fears. The example I can think of, I use this all the time when I talk in different lectures about fight or flight response, is that documentary Free Solo, right? Where he just climbs crazy faces of mountains without being tied in. And when my husband was watching this documentary and I'm walking through the room, I was like, oh, that guy has a broken brain. And then sure enough, later he goes and does, some brain scanning and his amygdala doesn't light up. So he looks down from these crazy heights and just doesn't have a fear response to it. So what you're talking about with, and this is fascinating, I didn't know that there was this tie with this enlarged area of the amygdala being enlarged, that it means overreaction.
Exactly.
So
Over response, under response, right?
Yeah.
These are two examples of the extremes. The other thing I was going to say about him, I'm glad you brought up the example. I remember I didn't watch the documentary, but I remember watching the 60 Minutes interview, and now I'm going to belie myself from previous episodes, but his affect was jarring to me. It wasn't that he wasn't like well-spoken or polite or interesting to listen to. It was that his eyes there was something there that was not active, right?
Yeah.
And then now, like you're saying later, there's actually a brain scan in this individual to illustrate that. So heading back to the research, individuals with this kind of wiring will often display stronger reactions to disgust-inducing images. And this indicates that the insula, which is a region linked to processing disgust and moral judgments, is more active. So this is fascinating to me because disgust is wired into us to keep us from eating or engaging in practices that could endanger our physical bodies, right? Like so we don't eat spoiled food. We don't eat the things growing on spoiled food, that kind of thing. There's the physical part, but moral judgments. So not only don't do this behavior, but also don't act in this way that affects others. It's a wild that the same part of the brain is active and engaged in both of those actions. And these neural patterns pave a foundational preference for order, tradition, and again, a heightened perception of threat. So the increased sensitivity to fear and disgust amongst conservatives has been associated with stronger in-group preferences and aversion to out-groups, potentially influencing attitudes towards immigration, diversity, and social change. And this predisposition may make individuals more susceptible to messages that emphasize threat and purity, which are often employed by certain activist and extremist groups to galvanize support. So when we really look closely at these neural and psychological factors, we understand that they're crucial in addressing the mechanisms through which ideological beliefs can be shaped and potentially manipulated.
Yeah, so here we have research on fear, but what about brain structure when it comes to hate? Well, there is some more research, and those studies have delved into the structural and functional brain differences associated with individuals involved in hate groups, or maybe some of those studies have just been done on people exhibiting extremist behaviors. So there might not be enough robust studies and research data points, but what we do have are insights into specific brain regions implicated in areas like empathy, threat perception, and moral reasoning. So again, going back to our friend the amygdala, as Dr. Scott discussed before, the amygdala plays a major role, but there are additional elements that are highly significant. So the right temporoparietal junction is crucial for perspective taking and empathy. A study published in Scientific Reports found that exposure to hate speech reduced activity in the right temporoparietal junction when participants viewed others in pain, regardless of group affiliation. This suggests that hate speech can broadly diminish empathic responses. We also have the prefrontal cortex, which tends to play a role as it is vital to decision-making and impulse control. So imaging studies have shown that individuals with antisocial behavior often have reduced gray matter volume in the prefrontal cortex, which may impair their ability to regulate emotion and behaviors. And finally, we have the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC, which plays a role in error detection as well as emotional regulation. Altered activity in the ACC has been observed in individuals with aggressive tendencies, suggesting difficulties in processing and emotional and social information.
To me, it's just fascinating to get to a place in research and science where we can understand human behavior on this incredibly more profound level. And yet at the same time, while all of this research can offer insight into the biological underpinnings of political ideology, we have to recognize that it is part of the complexity of human behavior. I know for some people listening up to this point, you may think that we're getting down and dirty and we're being judgy, but it's not. When we look at the bigger picture, there are reasons that we have evolved to have these different structures, and all of them are valuable. The important thing is to make connection and challenge our thinking, because we're not just an agrarian or a hunter-gatherer society anymore, trying to survive in the wild. We now have to survive as enormous clans and enormous communities, and that's going to require us to use our wiring in a different way. Not all individuals with conservative views exhibit heightened fear or disgust responses, just as people on the other end of the spectrum will be untouched by fear or disgust. It's not that clear cut.
Yeah.
Neural traits do not deterministically lead to extremist beliefs or affiliations. Environmental factors, personal experiences, individual choices play significant roles in shaping the political and social attitudes that individuals have. So ongoing interdisciplinary research is just absolutely essential for us to continue to deepen our understanding of how biological predispositions interact with external influences in the formation of political ideologies And when I say political ideologies, that's within the framework of talking about the concept of hate.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. Of course, there was a ton of research after World War II to look at like what happened here from a human perspective, and basically why and how did other humans, Nazis, come to dehumanize an entire population. And a lot of researchers and psychologists set out to look at this from different aspects. That brings us to our old friend Stanley Milgram, right? So the Milgram obedience study that was conducted in the 60s by psychologist Stanley Milgram, this tested how far people would go in obeying an authority figure, even when it involved harming another person. So it's so funny. I was going to do a little recap here just for everybody, but I was explaining this to my daughter the other day and she's like, oh yeah, I know this study. I was like, thank God, like you're only in 7th grade. You already know about this. She's like, the other people were actors, right? I'm like, yes. But participants were instructed to administer increasingly severe electric shocks to a learner, right? The actor for wrong answers. And despite the apparent distress of the learner, many participants continue to obey the authority figure, revealing the powerful influence of authority on human behavior. Okay, we all know the story. But what I found interesting is that Stanley Milgram, he set out to do this study in America first, which he did as a control group. And then he was going to go over to Germany and replicate it to see like what was special about the German population that lent to obedience to authority. However, he found that his control groups, quote unquote control groups here in America, and seemingly everyone was incredibly susceptible to this.
Again, it's about wiring, right? Like there's a part of us that is wired to understand our survival in terms of looking for a leader.
Yeah.
And that maybe sometimes that leader should be ourselves, know, and we should be more discerning. But again, I always go back to one of my favorite shows is The Good Place, because, when you get into season 3 in The Good Place, you realize everything is so screwed up because it's so complex. This is not the world of 3,000 years ago, which had its own despots and its own cult-like royalty-based, authoritarianism.
Sure.
It's been in our wiring for a long time. Again, wiring is there for a certain reason, but we still bear responsibility for what we're going to do with it. And also the Milgram has been there. I'm blanking on what it is, but there was a recent, like they redid it as part of a reality show. Still holds solid.
Same thing, huh?
Still holds up. Same thing. Willing to, I think one of the things that's really disturbing, first, you're uncomfortable watching those old black and white videos of the Milgram study. And it seems like, how could anybody believe that? Because the actor's going, ow, it's not like a very convincing.
It's like a Disney character or something like,
It is, but the distress on the part of the person that is being observed is very real. You see the body language in this guy change. His shoulders roll forward and he nervously looks over his shoulder at the guy in the white jacket and the clipboard saying, administer another shock, administer another shock.
Continue.
Yeah. And he continues. Oof. I was very lucky and blessed and fortunate to be able to attend a really great undergrad college back in the days of the dinosaurs. But I was that first semester, getting away from my town, I partied a little too much. I got it together by the end of the semester, but I was not a good student for the required philosophy classes that I had that first or second semester, which is so interesting because it just wasn't interesting to me, those sort of like conceptual things. That wasn't my focus back then. So now at this stage of my life, I have a huge, huge brain crush on researchers that look at data, but they discern it through a larger lens like sociology or philosophy. And one of these is researcher Jonathan Haidt, and he's a social psychologist and researcher that's been working on the nexus of social psychology and political polarization. And he has a wonderful book entitled The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And Haidt introduces what is called the moral foundations theory. And that theory asserts that human morality is based on several innate psychological symptoms that include care versus harm, fairness versus cheating, loyalty versus betrayal, authority versus subversion, sanctity versus degradation, and liberty versus oppression. Some pretty heady concepts right there,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So he suggests that people on the more liberal end of the spectrum tend to prioritize care and fairness, while conservatives value all six foundations more equally, especially loyalty, authority, and sanctity. And these divergences in moral emphasis can lead to misunderstandings and conflicts between political groups, as each side may perceive the other's moral concerns as less legitimate or even threatening, right? And of course, they can be used to inflame already fragile tensions. So Haidt's research shows that hate groups often exploit the moral foundations of loyalty, authority, and sanctity to foster a very strong in-group identity and to justify hostility towards out-groups. By framing their ideology around protecting traditional values or perceived threats to societal order, they tap into deep-seated moral institutions. And you can open any newspaper, any magazine, go on any news site and see daily examples of our elected political leaders spouting off about traditional values and these threats to societal order that less than 1% of our population needs to conform to their gender identity is threatening the fabric of society. And right now in speech, it's the trans community. And before that, it was the LGBT community. And then it was youths at the turn of the century. And it was the Irish and the Spanish and the Jews. It's always, it just completely recycles itself like the plot of the Wheel of Time.
I know.
The Wheel of Time
I
is
know.
every 10,000 years reincarnates itself.
It's almost like the focus is getting smaller and smaller on a group that is so minuscule. Like the percentage that would impact anybody else is just like, what?
Yeah, there was a wonderful interaction between, two politicians that was on C-SPAN where one wonderfully calm, measured politician was grilling a person that was representing the opposing side of the unfairness of trans athletes and asked about the stats. Well, how many players are in, the what is the acronym for college athletes? So the NCAA has and I'm not remember the number, maybe 15,000, across the country, all these colleges. And then he says, so the percentage of trans athletes is less than 1%. And then he gives, so it's this number. And you can see the guy on the opposing side, like a light bulb turns on in him. He's at a loss for words.
Yeah.
Because he was just reading from a script without any actually thinking about this. But again, I'm talking about social media, government processes being used as social media. And Haidt has highlighted this role of social media in amplifying moral outrage and amplifying tribalism. So the ability for things to go viral, to spread rapidly, with content that is so emotionally charged, absolutely will intensify divisions and make individuals more susceptible to extremist narratives.
Yeah, I think his newest book is called The Anxious Generation, and it's all about the impact of social media on adolescents. Sounds incredible. I really think it's going to be one of the next ones that I read, because it's one of those things that it is what it is. Like that train is rolling down the tracks, but especially as parents, like to just educate and know what to look for and keep touching base and knowing the impacts it has on our kiddos is really important. So I want to dive into that. And on that note, we can't not mention another factor that has really propelled things in the area of hate. And the internet completely acts as a catalyst, just accelerating polarization and hate at unprecedented speeds. And we talk about evolution in the parts of our brain that are still, lizard brain parts that have not evolved to the speed in which society and just how the world has grown around us. Not all of our brains can possibly keep up, right? With all the evolution in the world.
Right.
This is very similar to what we covered many moons ago in terms of QAnon and other online cults. Like we had just never seen the spread that fast. The information just finds its way to susceptible individuals way too quickly now. This also dovetails into some of the concepts that lent to our research on cyberbullying and online trolling. So yet again, if anyone wants to make a Venn diagram of our episodes on this episode, there's a lot of circles here. As we have talked about time and time again, uncivil online communication is common because online environments lower behavioral restraints. You don't have to look anyone in the eye or hear their judgment or their counter argument to you. And this ends up resulting in a phenomenon called the online disinhibition effect. This effect can lead both to positive behaviors like sharing or helping others, or maybe even oversharing a lot, right? That's called the benign disinhibition. And then negative behaviors like rudeness and hate online called toxic disinhibition. Online disinhibition effect stems from unique features of online interactions, the anonymity, the invisibility. And then we have the research that has confirmed these features that contribute to both the feeling of disinhibition and then those, what the research calls uncivil behavior online. Researchers and psychologists Patrick Forscher and Noor Kitteley published a paper in 2020 that explored the profile of the alt-right with a really big sample size. So this is interesting and robust data. Based on the subject's online behaviors, the researchers noted high rates of dehumanization and hallmark features of the dark triad, which you all know is made up of narcissistic, Machiavellian, and psychopathic traits. And then, if you guys recall back to our online trolling episode, sadism was also that fourth component that is now found in the research for people who behave this way online. So remember, we didn't think the dark triad could get any worse. Turns out, yes, it can. So that tends to be more about how people can express their hate, the behaviors. But I just wanted to mention that our access and consumption of online activity is what leads to the spread of hate feelings and thoughts more easily now. You don't have to find your, underground neighborhood hate group and go meet up in a parking lot somewhere. It's right there at your fingertips on your computer.
Right. And what makes it even more frightening when it's on your computer is you have that disinhibition. Yeah, on both sides, the information coming and going. The bottom line is, even if you go back to survival of the species in nature, homogeneity is a bad thing. We need diversity in the gene pool to evolve past things that will lead to extinction. And on a societal level, we also know that diversity is good because it moves us away from groupthink. And groupthink can be dangerous in so many different ways. Conflict created from different viewpoints leads to overcoming conflict. And when that happens, something beautiful comes out of it. Empathy, progress forward, growth. And we could do another whole episode on the demonization of empathy right now, which is just mind-blowing. Empathy and compassion being central to Christianity, no matter what the denomination is like it is the words of Jesus in the Bible.
Well, any religion.
Any religion, right? But like I use that example is because the ones that are crowing the most in the US are people that are identified with really wacko churches. And they've got the demon of empathy. It's like, wow. You really have a misfiring amygdala.
There you go.
I mean, there's different ways you can prep for this. Like we can tune into your prepping channel, right? For the worst.
I do not have a prepping channel yet. Yeah. But I mean, if we look at like, how do we even start to combat this problem? Exposure, right? I mean, if we look at it as a spectrum, kind of the hot topic as of 7-8 years ago has been implicit bias. If you go from implicit bias on one end all the way up to hate on the other end, and looking at how early in this pathway to hate can we intervene? If the first issue was like, we don't interact with the others, then exposure to people who are unlike us has always been the answer that research has showed to be able to combat anything from implicit bias on up to hate.
So what is the answer? Or is there even an answer given this incredibly complex combination of factors that allow hate speech to thrive, like social media, outside influence, these enormous populations that like just so quickly when it comes to social media? As Dr. Shiloh pointed out, on one end of the results or even the goals is to dehumanize the target, which logically indicates that humanizing and highlighting our connections and similarities may be the answer. First of all, one of the biggest ways society can fight hate speech and help people walk away from extremist beliefs is through direct conversation and real human connection. And that's not always an easy thing. We had politicians 50, 60, 70 years ago. I won't say they were all great people because they probably weren't, but they reached across the aisle. And now we see people that don't reach across the aisle.
Yeah.
If you work in a high level within the positions of the government and you're trying to prevent wars, the way that is done is by communication. We on the smaller end of the population, as far as like political activity or political power, we buy into this. Oh no, we're not going to talk to our enemies. We're not going to do that. We're not going to give them a position. It's like, no, you have to talk to people that you have nothing in common with to see where the commonalities lie, because there will be those there if you can start off from a place of commonality. I think in the second season of The Diplomat, this is one of the things that a character says at a speech, and this is a renowned like threat assessment, and he's a fixer. He's a fixer on a global level.
Yeah.
Now, on one hand, he's probably also been an arms dealer at one point, but he makes a really good point during this speech is you have to talk to the people that you dislike. You have to talk to the people that you have completely radically different ideologies in order for a conversation to take place. Doesn't mean you can control whether or not they engage, but we have to all try.
Yeah.
So a great example of this is an African-American musician and activist, Daryl Davis, who is known for actually sitting down and talking with members of the Ku Klux Klan. Over the years, Davis convinced more than 200 Klan members to leave the organization just by building friendships and having honest conversations that gently and sometimes not so gently challenge their beliefs. There's a fantastic documentary called Accidental Courtesy. There are great interviews on several of the shows, particularly 60 Minutes back in the day, and they showcase his successes to show how powerful personal connection can be when it comes to breaking down hate. His work highlights this vital truth. When people see their so-called enemies as real human beings, it becomes much harder to hold on to hateful ideologies.
Disconnection is a factor in the rise of hate. So connection through conversation can be a powerful tool, and we can help reduce extremist thinking by encouraging open conversations between people who don't always agree. And a wonderful example of this lately has been Pete Buttigieg, the former U.S. Secretary of Transportation, who showed how important this can be when he appeared on the Flagrant podcast, a show that usually leans more conservative. But he went on, instead of arguing or trying to own the other side, Buttigieg simply almost 3 hours, which is a long time. You and I talk a long time, but, imagine kind of being on the other side of having questions hurled at you, right, for 3 hours. But he spent this time answering tough questions, calmly explaining his views, and even finding common ground with the hosts. His appearance was praised as a smart move towards bridging divides and reminding people that honest, respectful dialogue still matters, even across political lines. I could listen to him talk forever. It's just like, how you get riled up hearing things? Like, he puts me in such a calm state.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Full disclosure, I did not like him when he first came on the scene. Yeah. I really did not like him. And it was my own personal bias. And my own personal bias has to do with being somebody that was relatively out, in a very tough environment from the age of 16.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think what it was I projected a lot of stuff onto him. And I was really frustrated that I'm not saying that his coming out process was easy. He's an extraordinarily accomplished individual, clearly wildly intelligent. He's very well trained to be responsive and not reactive. But I will take ownership of being skeptical and judgy at first. And I'll also take ownership of how I completely turned around, because I went and goes, I don't like the way I'm feeling about this. And he seems to be doing some good stuff, and let me go listen to him more and more. And the more I listened to him, I was like, holy crap, this guy's a ninja.
Yeah.
He's an absolute ninja when he talks. And the Flagrant podcast is such a group of bros
Yeah.
They pseudo intellectualize their stances. And Pete just goes in there and just very calmly deconstructs the majority of what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll challenge, like, well, okay, here's what I hear you saying. So if you're saying that, then how does this work? Because it doesn't work, right? And you could see like the light bulbs coming on in people's
Without
eyes.
making them feel stupid.
Exactly, because that's never going to work.
It's going to send up defense mechanisms.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, for sure. But it's engagement like this that can chip away at that idea that different political identities automatically make people enemies. So that's really nice to see. Counter speech is an extremely effective tool for social media. And the hashtag I am here movement is a good example of people teaming up online to push back. Volunteers in this group monitor comment sections on social media and respond to hateful or extremist posts with facts, empathy, and calm rebuttals. Instead of getting into toxic arguments, they try to steer conversations towards more civil, fact-based discussions. Research shows that this kind of counter speech can make online spaces less hostile and discourage the spread of extremist ideas. It proves that small actions multiplied across very large groups can shift the tone of public dialogue in really big ways that we need these days.
Right. And that brings up another topic that we won't diverge into, but many times, especially today, online rhetoric is further aggravated or exacerbated by the presence of bots that are, and when I say actors, I mean political actors, people who are hired to say things that will inflame conversations. So the fact that this organization works to counter that is very, very important. But I wish more people would become involved. Like if you feel like you have that ability to be even-minded or even-speeched, then please look into this. Beyond individual conversations and online activism, community level interventions also play a really significant role. So there's a program called Exit USA, and it works to help people leave extremist groups by offering them support, resources, and a path back into mainstream society. So many times individuals who join hate groups do so because they're searching for identity, belonging, and a sense of purpose. Programs like these offer positive alternatives, helping former extremists rebuild their lives with education, counseling, and job training. Addressing the emotional and social needs behind radicalization is key if we just want to truly dismantle these harmful movements instead of pushing them underground.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into our, what we normally have is our case presentations. Honestly, I don't even know what to call these in this episode because
more examples.
More examples. They're just such massive examples of hate. And, they're unfortunately throughout history, there's just so much to pick from. So we're going to give you a couple of examples, really just a overview, because each of these can have so much discussion and give so much attention to them. So first, we wanted to talk about the Rwandan genocide, which occurred over the course of approximately 100 days from April to July of 1994 and resulted in the mass murder of around 800,000 people, primarily of the Tutsi ethnic group by members of the Hutu majority. For some historical context, long-standing ethnic tensions between the Hutu and Tutsi were exacerbated during Belgian colonial rule, which favored the Tutsi minority. After Rwanda gained independence in 1962, power then shifted to the Hutu majority, increasing resentment and hostilities towards the Tutsi. Fast forward to the early 1990s when the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF, a rebel group composed of mostly Tutsi exiles, invaded Rwanda in 1990, leading to a civil war with the Hutu-led government. There was a peace agreement called the Arusha Accords, which was signed in 1993, but despite that, tensions remained really high. Then on April 6, 1994, the Rwandan president, a Hutu, was killed when his plane was shot down. This assassination triggered the genocide as Hutu extremists blamed the RPF and used it as a pretext for mass killings.
Almost immediately after the assassination, Hutu militias and government forces began systematic killings of Tutsi civilians, as well as moderate Hutus who opposed the genocide or supported peace. Despite warnings and early reports of mass atrocities, the international community, including the UN and Western powers, largely failed to intervene, and UN peacekeepers were present but had limited authority and numbers to make any difference. The RPF, led by Paul Kagame, resumed fighting and eventually captured Kigali, the capital, in July 1994, which effectively ended the genocide. In the aftermath, over 2 million Hutus, including many perpetrators, fled to neighboring countries, especially Zaire, which is now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, and that created a massive refugee crisis. The genocide left Rwanda deeply scarred, but it has since seen significant recovery and development under Kagame's leadership, though human rights concerns remain.
Yeah, a really horrific situation that is, 1994 was not that long ago. I want to turn now to another example that highlights something far more recent. When COVID-19 first emerged in January of 2020, it sparked not just fear, but also, I was going to say a wave of misinformation that feels really small. So throughout the pandemic, bad actors took to social media using, fake information, but fake documents that looked like they came from trusted health organizations to spread unnecessary panic and paranoia, often with some really devastating consequences. And in the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities in particular, they ended up facing a painful surge in hate. For more than a year, many endured verbal and physical attacks, leaving them feeling unsafe and unwelcome in public spaces. AAPI-owned businesses were also targeted. According to the group Stop AAPI Hate, by August 2021, over 9,000 anti-Asian incidents had been reported. Here are just some examples from their website. So in terms of verbal assault examples, this group says that anti-Chinese sentiment is not exclusive to Chinese Americans, and members of other AAPI ethnicities are often categorized, kind of lumped in with Chinese Americans. So in February 2020, a Thai woman was subjected to a racist tirade from a fellow writer on a Los Angeles subway. The man shouted at the passenger, repeating old tropes such as the idea that Chinese people were natural carriers of infectious disease. Quote, every disease has ever came from China because they're fucking disgusting, is what he was yelling on the subway. We also saw several examples of physical assault. I mean, I remember hearing, just working in the police department, hearing about the crime reports that they were taking in some of our more Asian populated areas of the city. So in February 2020, a man assaulted an Asian woman on a New York subway, apparently convinced that she was infected with COVID-19, calling her diseased, and again, shouting expletives. The man kicked and punched the woman in front of other onlookers.
Yeah, and adults weren't the only victims. So Stop AAPI Hate highlights that the U.S. Department of Education reports that AAPI students already suffer from classroom bullying at higher rates than any other race or ethnicity. As a result of COVID-19 related hysteria, there has been an increase in anti-Asian bullying in schools around the country. So here are a couple of examples of COVID-19 related bullying and discrimination of AAPI students. In a Los Angeles area middle school, an Asian student was physically attacked by classmates who were making unfounded accusations of him being infected with COVID-19. The boy's injuries were serious enough for him to be sent to an emergency room. In another Los Angeles middle school, a teacher sent an Asian student to the school's nurse's office after he coughed from swallowing water. Other non-Asian students had been coughing, but they were not sent to the nurse. So after being sent back to his classroom, the student faced ridicule from his classmates, accusing him of having COVID-19.
There were also group attacks. Just last year, a California man was sentenced to 12 months in federal prison for disrupting a Stop Asian Hate rally in March of 2021. While driving, he intentionally ran a red light and careened through a crowded crosswalk of peaceful protesters. Trial evidence revealed that the man drove through the peaceful rally yelling, "Go back to China," and other racial slurs at the demonstrators. He narrowly missed another group of demonstrators that included a 9-year-old child. He then got out of the car and continued to yell racist threats at the demonstrators. He then called the police, identifying himself as John Doe, and falsely reported that rally participants were about to trample his car. The defendant pleaded guilty to civil rights charges in October of 2023.
There was a very recent news story by PBS SoCal about Asian hate incidents now that we are 5 years post-pandemic. It had some firsthand accounts from a woman born and raised in LA, Anna Wong, the niece of pioneering movie star Anna May Wong, who dealt with her own insane racial discrimination nearly a century ago. Anna talked about being in a Bed Bath & Beyond the first year of the pandemic, and a white woman screamed at her saying, "6 feet away from me, you Chinese witch." Unbelievable.
I know,
Unbelievable.
I know.
There were other incidents as well that she experienced and expressed her fear of being in public settings, just doing normal everyday things. In PBS's story, they noted that even as the worst of the pandemic has passed, the numbers tell us that the racism hasn't. Because between March 2020 and the end of 2023, Stop AAPI Hate logged more than 12,000 reports of hate incidents, and they believe that it's likely just scratching the surface. Over 700 of those reports came in during 2023 alone. And to put that into perspective, a poll by AAPI Data and the Associated Press, NORC, last year found that about 1 in 3 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders said that they experienced some form of abuse based on their race or ethnicity in just the past year. Today, those working to combat anti-Asian hate are increasingly concerned that things could get worse, especially with the current political push for immigration crackdowns, English-only laws, and bans on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs.
Yeah, just again, like ever present, and why we felt like we needed to at least talk about the psychology of hate today. As we turn to looking at entertainment examples, I mean, there's so many great film and TV depictions of how hate has historically played out here in the US and globally. So I figure, we'll each cover one here, but there are so many. I'm sure everyone's thinking of them. So my example is a film that I really, really love. I went back and watched it, and man, it's still just as hard to watch, but such a good film. That's American History X from 1998. Really well done film that explores themes of racism, redemption, and family. The film follows Derek Vineyard, played by Edward Norton, and he is a former neo-Nazi leader who, after serving time in prison for a brutal hate crime that I can't even watch, I have to fast forward it, seeks to prevent his younger brother, Danny, who's played by Edward Furlong. I mean, it doesn't get any more 90s than like Edward Furlong.
Yeah.
From essentially following down the same path as him. And through a series of flashbacks, which in the film, all the flashbacks are filmed in black and white, and all the present day are filmed in color, which is kind of cool. And it's an easy way to keep track of what's going on. Yeah. Yeah. The film reveals Derek's transformation in prison, where he confronts these past Nazi beliefs and experiences, and really like what were the consequences of his hatred. And then upon release, he attempts to reform and guide his little brother away from white supremacy. But as it goes, the cycle of violence proves very difficult to escape. The film delivers a lot of really harrowing commentary on prejudice, the influence of ideology, the struggle for change, all with this like very Southern California family. I mean, you have Beverly D'Angelo, that's like the neurotic chain smoking mom of these white supremacist boys. Stacy Keach is like the white supremacist leader. It's just like super creepy and gross. It's great cast, great film, very disturbing. But if you've never seen it, I think definitely worth a watch.
Yeah, it's really good. Of course, Edward Norton is a brilliant actor. Apparently very difficult to work with because he is a brilliant actor. But
I love that you always give us the tea.
I know, like he did.
He's so good, so good.
But he's really, really good in this. And just as a side note about some of these movies, unfortunately, one of the things that can happen is that even though the point of the movie is to help move people away from these ideologies, inevitably there's some part of the farthest end of that spectrum that will go, oh, let's start using curb stomping.
Oh, God.
We're going to incorporate that. which,
Yeah.
further goes back that wiring issue that we were talking about
Mm.
earlier, which, by the way, folks, we'll have all the research on that in our show notes if you want to read those studies about the imaging, which I think is fascinating. But another example in entertainment is the movie entitled Hotel Rwanda from 2004, a historical drama. So I want to say it's a historical drama. It's based on the ethnic cleansing genocide that happened between the Hutus and the Tutsis. This is a fictionalized account of historic moments, and it's the true story of Paul Rusesabagina, a hotel manager who sheltered more than 1,000 refugees during the 1994 Rwandan genocide. And the entire film is framed by this extreme brutality of the conflict between the Hutu and Tutsi ethnic groups, and also does a great job of exposing how just completely ineffective and slow the international community was to intervene. It was directed by Terry George, and it received widespread critical acclaim for the emotional impact and the historical importance. Don Cheadle played Paul, and he earned an Academy Award nomination and significantly elevated his career. I mean, he really
Yes.
took off after this, and well-deserved. He's wonderful. He's just wonderful.
Love him.
As well as his co-star, Sophie Okonedo, who portrayed his wife, Tatiana, and she got major recognition with another Oscar nomination. The film is still praised today for bringing global attention to the Rwandan genocide, although some critics have noted that it simplified complex political realities that had historical longitude for Western audiences. And in the following years, many of the survivors came forward to share their truly, truly horrific experiences in their challenge to stay alive in their various places of hiding as they were sought by their former neighbors, now armed with machetes.
Yeah.
There are several women that were interviewed that were saved in basically a bathroom. I think it was like 12 women piled into a bathroom that the owner of the home moved a wardrobe in front of.
Yeah.
And they said that it was this constant, like all night long, there were patrols outside that knew women were hiding in there somewhere. They had already searched the house and couldn't find them. So they circled the house, dragging their machetes along the wall and taunting them night after night after night. Now, that's a horror movie.
It is a horror.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. 20 something years ago, this was kind of my first introduction to the Rwandan genocide. Great film. Don Cheadle was after that was one of my favorite actors for so long. So good.
Yeah. So long episode, guys. Thanks for sticking with us. Really heavy stuff, and also really topical, current stuff going on for what is currently happening with some really horrific things happening right now with the suspension of due process in our country that is being escalated by this rhetoric. So
yeah, but hopefully, some information of just, sometimes in these big moments of feeling so helpless, of stuff happening around us, we can sit back and say, okay, what can I do? And if it keeps you from being reactive and lashing out online because it makes you feel better for a moment, and you choose to take a breath and have more of a civil interaction, or choose not to engage, or maybe you go and you volunteer for one of these organizations that's, looking for comments online and doing your part to help steer people in a more neutral way, civil way. Who knows? So it's, again, put yourself out there, expose yourself in a safe way to people that maybe think differently than you, and see how you can see them as human beings. Right? If you guys are listening to this on the day it comes out, please tune in this Saturday. We are going to be talking to Dr. Amy and Dr. Megan from Women in Crime on our live Behind the Couch stream. So come and join us on YouTube Saturday at 4:00 Pacific Standard Time. We're going to talk about crime and how it intersects with media. So it should be a really good conversation. We adore them. I don't know how we're just going to keep it to an hour with the four of us.
Maybe it'll be an extended episode.
Maybe it will. We'll see where it goes. But that's all we have for you on this episode. So we'll see you next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Bye, guys.
Bye, folks.
Take care. We sincerely thank you for spending some time with us today. LA Not So Confidential is part of Alienist Entertainment and the Crawl Space Media Network. Each episode is hosted, produced, and written by Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. Our post-production editing and sweetening magic is handled by the multi-talented Jason Usry of Ear Cult Productions.
Our theme music, entitled Cool Vibes Film Noir, is composed and performed by the talented Kevin MacLeod. He graciously allows us to use his music via a Creative Commons attribution license. Please check out all of Kevin's amazing work on YouTube.
All of the resources for each episode can be found on our website at www.la-not-so-confidential.com. You can find us on Blue Sky and Instagram at LA Not So Podcast. On TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube, we are at LA Not So Confidential. Media inquiries and bookings are scheduled at alienistentertainment@gmail.com.
Once a month, we go live on YouTube on a Saturday afternoon. So stay tuned to our social media announcements to join our interactive broadcast entitled Behind the Couch, where we interview guests on a number of psych, criminal justice, and true crime topics.
And lastly, we'd be honored if you joined our Patreon at patreon.com/LA Not So Podcast. With a subscription, you get an ad-free listening experience, additional content, host interaction, and you'll be the first to know about upcoming live events, social gatherings, and super cool merch.
So thanks for listening, and join us next time on LA
Not So
Confidential.